let's talk about significance of a dress. Tell me how this book came about from your point of view.
Well, I was invited to join a team co-editing an anthology called Overland, Oversea, which was in response to the refugee crisis. And I included a couple of my poems in that book. But of course, I didn't just stop writing there. I carried on writing poems about the theme of refugees. And then when Arachne Press put a call out for submissions for an anthology, I thought, I'll have a go at that. After all, I've been published in The Other Side of Sleep and Story Cities, so I stand a chance here. I sent them off and you came back and said, have you got any more poems? I'd like to do a collection. To which the only sensible answer, of course, is yes. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So before the anthology that you were editing, had you written a lot of these, or was that the starting point?
It was really the starting point for the refugee poems. I mean, I'd written a lot of poems about sort of loosely women's issues, looking at domestic violence struggles and so on, because that's what interests me too. So taking some of that perspectives and looking at the refugee situation and how easy it is to look at the numbers and statistics and then forget that every single statistic is actually a story. There's a human being behind it, very often a family too.
Yeah. And I remember when you sent the 10 or so for the anthology, because it was one of my short fat ones, so I said a few poets, a lot of poems, and I emailed you back and said, yeah, I don't want these for the anthology, I want a collection. And they make the hair stand up on my arms. They are so vivid and shocking and inspiring, and I thought, is this a good idea? Should I strike while the iron's hot, let's get them in the anthology? No, I'm going to stick out for a collection. Yeah, because it was just, my instant reaction was more. And for anybody who hasn't read this might sound either dry or overtly political or worthy, and it's none of those things, because it absolutely gets to the heart of it, and it's about the people and lives in microcosm and lives forced into being microcosm. You know, sort of wherever you're going to get clean water from becomes the issue. How do you protect your daughter becomes the issue. Yeah, and the fact that there's a war and travel and all going on behind it is sort of, yeah, let's just deal with this tiny bit that we've actually got any control over. And that was what struck me. And the title poem, Significance of the Dress, which I don't think was originally the title, can't remember now. But that one just sort of brought all of those issues together in one poem, because you've got all of the stuff about domestic violence and whether it's safe to walk the streets at night and all of that. And you've got all of the stuff sort of more generically about refugees. And then there's this one poem slap in the middle of it, doing all of the work. That's got to be the title poem.
That's fantastic to hear, because that's what I'm trying to do, very much give the human stories of this side of it. Yes, the title poem is about a sort of wedding dress hire shop in the middle of a refugee camp, which seems totally incongruous.
It does, it seems completely bizarre.
Stop and think how long people are kept in these camps in a limbo where they can't start their new life because they've not been accepted for asylum, but they can't go back to where they came from either, because where they came from very often is not there.
Yes.
So yes, of course, people fall in love and get married, and some of the marriages are arranged, sadly, but some of them will be love matches. So how do these brides find their dresses? They can't afford to buy, so they hire them. And of course, the idea of the image of the, you know, picking this gorgeous dress for the big day, as it's very much sold as your wedding day, and then not trying not to notice stains on the hem because it's been worn several times over. That image just stuck with me and worked.
Yes, the thing that really struck me about it was the mural of the girl in the white dress with the teddy bear. And I just thought, oh no. It really, really sort of brought home that that girls are growing up in these places. But, you know, they might arrive at 5 and they'll still be there when they're old enough to get married. And that is just so appalling, you know. And of course that they're getting married very young as well, as a protection in some cases. And this is what I mean about that poem. It does so much work with so few words. It just sort of bam, 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 bam. And I was sort of reeling from it going, gosh, this is good.
The mural was there from an international charity which works with children, and it's a warning against child brides, because for families, you know, eager to protect their daughters, and let's face it, old-fashioned misogynist attitudes reign in these refugee camps. Daughters often can't work, and it's too dangerous for them to move around the camp alone. An elderly parent can't protect the daughter, so very often marriage presents itself as an easy solution.
Yeah.
And you know,
or the only solution.
Yeah, and the beautician in the poem says, I don't ask their age. They know that some of these girls are underage, but they don't want to speak out against it because of the repercussions.
The significance of a dress, refugee camp, northern Iraq. Even if home is makeshift and her carriage is a borrowed pair of shoes that dance over gravel baked in the desert heat, a bride still wants to feel special, at least for one day. No one can afford to buy when 20 neighbours share a latrine and there's a constant vigil against disease. Tulin, named after a daughter, offers gown hire, makeup and hairstyling that will withstand humid evenings. I don't ask how old they are, says the beautician. A mural outside shows a girl in a white gown holding a teddy bear. The future is tomorrow. Next year is a question. A wedding is a party, a welcome, a sign of hope. The dresses sparkle with sun-reflected diamante, but the gravel paths of the camp leave the hems stained.
So should we talk about some of the other poems in this? What are the ones that you've got a particular affection for? I know we're not allowed to have favourites, same as children, but you must have one or two that you're just, yeah, that one really works for me.
It's the idea of putting this together almost got derailed when you emailed me and said, have you got any happy poems? Prose. Happy poems. I don't do happy poems.
You don't a lot, no. I just thought it needs one happy poem, so we acknowledge that exists and it throws all the rest into context.
And so it was a scrabble then to try and find something that was a little more light-hearted. Standing
on Ice, I think, was one of the ones you put in volunteers as happy, which is sort of happy for now.
And Icon in Red, which was actually about the Golden Gate Bridge and the idea of bridging, bridging communities. And perhaps When Your Name's Not Smith, which was me standing in a bank and a male bank teller, as you could guess, telling me he knew how to spell my name. And then he filled out his form and I had to wait for him to finish and he wouldn't take my spelling from me. And then I couldn't sign it because he'd spelled my name wrong.
Do I own up to having favourites? So difficult. There's so many good ones in here. And yeah, the wide-ranging as well, although they very definitely are pulled together by significance.
Yes, alongside the refugee poems, there's also Suffragette Alice Hawkins' diary, There's a poem about the guy who set up a piano in the middle of College Green in Bristol with the idea of
Try and win
serenading
his
his
girlfriend.
ex-lover back.
Yes.
A professional musician who was dumped by his girlfriend decided to set up a keyboard on College Green in Bristol, which is just outside the main council offices and runs alongside Park Street, which is one of the busiest shopping streets and also leads up to Bristol University, with the idea of serenading her to win her back. This is how Rapunzel ends. He calls his girlfriend Rapunzel, after the girl in the tower with nothing to do except clean and sing. She falls in love with the first person who doesn't look like her imprisoner. He says she broke his heart and he wants her back. He sets up a piano on a patch of green outside the council offices near one of the city's busiest streets. He puts up boards urging passers-by to like and support him on social media, an action that asks people to take sides, preferably his. She's immune to emotional blackmail. This isn't a fairy tale. He wasn't her prince.
I often wonder about those things, when they do the very public proposal, and you think, don't put that kind of pressure on. How dare you?
Yeah.
I really hope she says, no, you deserve it. Oh dear. Yeah. Actually, I'm very fond of the Doctor from Aleppo's bookkeeping, which I put at the end, because I felt that an accounting should happen at the end, and the pros and cons and the credits and debits in it, and the way you can almost read one line or the other or run across. And I spent a long time working on that, getting it typeset right, apart from anything else. So I feel rather intimately involved with it.
Yes, it is set out in 2 columns as an echo double entry bookkeeping, and it can be read both horizontally and vertically. Yeah.
So I've 8,000 people, no sinking or drowning so far. It's just makes my blood run cold. At the same time, it's the sort of, it's the forensic analytical approach to these appalling things, and yet what choice does he have either? And it's just so.
Yeah, I mean, he, like most of us, wants to protect his family
and
reunite with his family.
Yeah.
I mean, he sent his son on, but he still needs to send money to them.
Yeah.
He's not allowed to go and earn money and work. And yet he's a doctor, so it seems daft not letting him work and save people.
Exactly. Yes.
He's setting up, trafficking in a way, getting people to pay for their boat journey across the Mediterranean. Yes. It's interesting you mentioned language as well, because one of the poems, Stories from the Jungle, where the jungle is the nickname given to the refugee camp in Calais, which I think is demolished now, but was very much famous a few years ago. Because one of the common questions, something David Cameron said about these people not stopping in France, they want to come across to England, is language.
Yeah, because they've learned English, they haven't learned.
They don't want to learn French from scratch, which is entirely natural.
Entirely understandable.
You cleave to the familiar, and when you've already got relatives in England, that's where you want to go. So Stories from the Jungle took 6 of those stories and explored them in each stanza. And it also has roots in colonialism, because the reason a lot of these people know English is because these countries were former colonies.
Yeah.
The English newspapers ignore the ones that went to France and stopped in France because they speak French.
They've been French colonies.
Was colony, why in Sudan is one of the official languages English? Colonies.
Yes. Should we talk about the cover?
Yes.
As our co-production. Doesn't show up terribly well on here, and I've had to redo this slightly because it didn't come out as well as I was hoping. So it's slightly bigger on the export version and the ebook. Yeah, so this is in fact a piece of artwork by Emma, and it's in cross stitch.
Cross stitch, yeah.
Yes, cross stitch. And it must be such tiny, tiny, tiny cross stitch. And how big is the actual image?
It's about 50 centimetres
So, yeah.
big originally.
Going on for double the size it is actually.
It's done in cross stitch on 18 count Ada. I was wandering around Leicester city centre thinking, I've got a book called The Significance of a Dress, title poems about wedding dresses. It would be good to have an embroidered image on the front cover. And I came across an image of a wedding dress. I took the photo of it and thought, that's perfect. It was one of those pre-loved wedding dress shops that had that sort of second-hand feel to it.
Yes.
And then I converted it to a chart, stitched it, and then took several photos of it to send to you.
Yeah.
Finalised the dress.
Yes, and initially you were saying, "Oh, I sent you this," and I kept looking at it thinking, "But it's a photograph. What's she talking about?" and then you said, "No, look properly." And I looked. Oh God, yes, it is actually. Every single thing here is a stitch, which is kind of amazing. So I thought, right, well, I'll rise to the challenge. Then I'll embroider the title.
Yes, when I did the launch in Leicester, I actually brought the original cross stitch along with me and had it displayed as part of the launch. It was a bit difficult travelling down to London on coach and then tube to get it to the London launch. But
yes, but I brought the embroidery, so we had that.
Yes, yes, we have the title.
Yeah, and of course, I'm going to include in this little video thing, I'm going to put the trailer we did in, because I'm rather proud of that.
Yeah, I love the trailer.
Starring Rolf Emily Bear, who was rescued from a tip, so seemed quite appropriate. We found her in the skip in the street. You can't do that to a teddy bear. You don't want them, give them away, fine. You know, I mean, she's hideous, but you had to be rescued.
Yes, it's...
yeah, so that was interesting putting the book, the cover together, and of course because the original wasn't quite the same proportions, so I had to mess about with it, and so I ended up sort of doing multiple layers at the bottom of the skirt so that it just sort of washed off into nothingness, and the back is just a detail of the bottom of the skirt, because it somehow sort of, it spoke to me of hopes and disappointments.
Yes, that's very much the idea.
Quite a way to go with it.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's been a really interesting book to put together, and so frustrating with the launch, because this book came out in March.
It was just before the lockdown.
Just before lockdown, we managed to squeeze the London launch in sort of a week or two before lockdown, which meant that just as the books arrived in the shops closed.
Everything shut.
Everything shut. So frustrating. And of course, now the shops are starting to open. They've had the book 3 months. They haven't sold any, so they are entitled and are returning them.
Yes, it's...
Big message to everybody watching. Buy our copy! Now! Thank you very much. Or else we'll send the spiders round.
Yes, it's been
lovely book. It's so frustrating.
It's been lovely to see a lot of poetry events move online.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the online events don't translate into sales the same way that you can put a book table out at launch, and people have to walk past the book before they exit. Yeah, the London launch seemed to go very well, sales-wise, a few were sold on the day.
Yeah.
But in Leicester, I got told with less than 24 hours notice the library were no longer open, and I had to find an alternative venue. incredibly short notice, which I just about managed to do using the Scrapped Off Community Hub. But then people weren't available on the Saturday who'd been available for the original launch. And if everyone who'd sent apologies was actually able to turn up, I'd have had 6 times the audience I had. And you don't want to complain and put a downer on it, but you do tend
curse
to feel,
you, COVID-19.
you know, I've got books sitting in my desk that I could have sold that night. And it's hard to think, well, yes, people will still buy the copies, but they're not doing it now. And of course, that has implications with bookshop returns and Bertram's going under. And so on.
So it's been very frustrating. Please buy a copy. Please buy a copy. It's beautiful. Spectacular. Spine tingling. It's not just me that says so. Sarah Leavesey says, nothing is unimportant in the significance of address, where each poem's narrative is personal and individual, yet simultaneously universal in its reach and significance. Emily's evocative imagery is reinforced by taut lines, striking juxtapositions, and intimate, moving details that pack emotional punch. The significance of address is a beautiful, haunting collection. It's a jolly nice endorsement, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and it was pleasing to see Melissa Todd at the Blue Nib describe me as an avenging angel who gives voices to the voiceless.
You're going to have a t-shirt made up with that.
Yeah.
Avenging angel.
Feel like putting it on the email signature.
Yeah, I should think so. What are you working on at the moment?
I'm reviewing, because I'm always reviewing, and I've been drafting some new poems and just waiting to see what happens, really.
And are they thematic in any way, the new poems?
I wouldn't have said that there was an emerging theme yet. I mean, some of them have come out of the current pandemic situation, but I often just sit and carry on writing, and then when I've realised I've got about 60 poems there, I might start looking and saying what themes are emerging, how do I put them together.
Okay.
Yep.
Brilliant. Lovely to talk to you.
Yes, lovely to see you again.
Yeah. Okay. Speak again soon, I hope.
Back in 2015, at the height of the refugee crisis, the then Prime Minister David Cameron made a throwaway remark that was quoted widely in the media about how it was a shame for British holidaymakers in places like Greece and Crete and on the Isle of Kos having to put up with these refugees arriving and spoiling their holidays. So I wanted to write a poem that explored the opinions of one of these holidaymakers, and I made her a call centre worker, so she was definitely somebody who could only afford one holiday a year. So this poem is set on Kos in the summer of 2015. I saw life jackets left on the beach. I asked the waiter, but he shrugged. Later loaded crates into the manager's car. She looked dead on her feet, said something about an extra sitting at dinner, but there weren't any new guests. It was my 2 weeks in the sun. I'd eaten nothing but lettuce for weeks to look okay in my bikini. The waiter stopped flirting, went quiet. I followed him to the derelict hotel, where tents had sprung up like mushrooms overnight. He didn't want to talk. I didn't push it. You learn that in a call centre. Some people think you're a machine and they just poke buttons. Others, you're the only person they've talked to all day. I'd only come to sunbathe, so helping give out food didn't seem much. One mother told me men drifted around and she didn't think her daughters were safe. After their journey, they didn't want confinement to a crowded room. I became a chaperone. I taught them hopscotch on the beach. Their laughter's such a strange sound. Paperwork's slow at the best of times. I left my euros for the hotel to pass on. I hope it helped. I bought them sanitary pads. People don't think about that. Their bodies capable of creating life.